Hello and welcome to another Tri-tutors video. In today's video we're going to go through a guide to transactional writing for DBE students. So this is if you're writing the Department of Basic Education NSC examination. So as you know, transactional writing comes into paper 3. It is tested as section B, so section A is your creative essay, section B is transactional writing, and if you look at past papers, they typically provide you with 6 different topics for transactional writing, and you can choose 2 of those topics to write about. So you don't have to do all 6, obviously. You select 2 and you write on those 2. Each of the pieces is 25 marks, so it constitutes for 50% of your paper 3 paper. Section A is 50%, section B is 50% ultimately. So what is transactional writing? Transactional writing is more, I like to think of it as more real-world writing than perhaps an essay. So you're going to be writing in formats which you would probably use in your professional life after school. But remember that transactional writing is all about the student's personal voice. It is your opportunity to express your thoughts and opinions in a formal test or examination. These thoughts must be insightful, must be backed up with sufficient justification. But the entirety of paper 3, the creative essay and the transactional writing, is your opportunity as an English student to present a form of originality. So if you think about paper 1 is very strict in terms of you have to adhere to the text. Paper 2, even more strict to an extent. You are adhering to literature. And here in paper 3, you have more freedom in terms of how you're writing. However, in saying that, it still has to be formal, it still has to be academic, and it still needs to fit the criteria so that you can get the marks that you deserve. So it needs to fit the rubric for transactional writing or for an essay or whatever you're doing. So in another slide we're actually going to go through the rubrics and you can see how your marker marks your transactional writing, what they're looking for. So as much as there is a sense of freedom, there's also a sense of this is still an exam, this is still academic, this is still getting marked for its English. So some questions that you need to ask yourself are, what is the intention or purpose of this piece? Who am I writing to? What should my piece be about? Should it be formal or informal? What's my plan? An introduction, 2 body paragraphs and a conclusion, or something else? Different formats have different structures. So these sorts of questions you need to be asking yourself as during reading time, as you're reading through these pieces. Or the topics. Have these questions circling in your head. It's really important in paper 3 to use that reading time productively, because there's not a lot to read in the paper, but there is a lot of thinking that needs to be done in terms of analyzing the topic. So my advice for any piece of writing that you ever write is that you need to spend time actually analyzing the topic and seeing what they're asking of you. So ask yourself these questions as you are looking through the topics. So let's get into some different aspects and let's break down the expectations of transactional writing. So something which is quite obvious but that you get marked on is content. And you have to make sure that your content is organized and intentional, that it is clearly aligned with the topic, that is purpose driven, that it proves an argument or an intention, is insightful and original, incorporates perspectives on current affairs if relevant. So your content, the big thing with content is it has to be relevant to the topic. So you can't get a topic on one thing and start talking about something completely different or completely obscure. And if your idea about what you want to talk about is, slightly original, that's great, but you have to link it and show the marker how it's relevant. I think sometimes what students forget is that their marker is not in their head. I know it sounds silly, but often they have all these thought patterns and they've linked their story or what they're going to write about to the topic in their head, but sometimes they actually forget to write that link for the marker, and you're not there to tell your marker that link. So often when I go through text, pieces of writing that students have done, and I read it with them and I show them how I'm marking, they're like, oh, but this is what I meant. I'm like, well, you haven't put it on the paper, so therefore I can't mark that. So if you are going to go original with your content, if you are going to, add that originality or add that creativity, that's wonderful. This is your time to do that, but you must show the connection to the topic. I hope that makes sense. Your content needs to be relevant, so it needs to be aligned with the topic, but it also needs to be organized and intentional. So you can't just put a brain dump of all these different ideas. It needs to be structured. It needs to have a clear intention behind it. Why are you providing this piece of information? Remember when we talk about literature essays, and you can see in my previous video on literature essays, I always speak to you about argument. And in this piece, obviously, it's not a clear argument like a literature essay, right? Where you're arguing a particular perspective. However, you still have a particular intention with every single format, and so you still want to make sure that you're delivering on communicating that intention. And so your content must all be based around that, and you must keep invoking what the purpose or the intention of the piece is. Showing insight is so important. So insight is like the opposite of superficiality. So when you write something, you must, or when you think about something, instead of just thinking of something on a surface, superficial level, try and sort of zoom in on that idea and provide some sort of insight that is original, that is unique to you, that shows that you have thought about this topic in detail. If it makes sense to include current affairs or to show your knowledge of the world, then include it. If it makes no sense to do that, then don't do that. For example, just a simple example, if you're writing an obituary, for instance, then, incorporate the fact that maybe this person died of COVID or something. That's more of a current affair, I suppose, not really at the moment, but I hope that you sort of catch on to what I'm saying. So if it makes sense to include something about the staggering unemployment rate, maybe you're writing a formal letter and you can include the staggering unemployment rate, that's a current affair, and that shows your mark, oh wow, this person is worldly, they are thinking, they are reading. The next thing to keep in mind is the audience and the format. So as you can see with content, it's pretty similar stuff to what you should be thinking about when you're writing an essay. But an essay is very different to a transactional piece of writing, and that's where your audience and your format comes in. So going and studying your formats is so important because it creates a really good impression to your marker, and you're going to get marks for it. So make sure that you go and study the correct addresses and things like that. I know it seems very tough, and especially if you're watching this at the end of the year and you're about to write your final, going to study those formats is somewhat tedious, but it's really quite important. The big thing with transactional writing is that you're not just writing an essay, you're writing to your marker. But here you're actually writing to an audience. So you need to understand who your audience is. Are you writing a magazine article that's going to be featured in some fancy magazine that business people read? Or are you writing a speech to your fellow matrics? So you need to think about your audience, because you're knowing who your audience is, it's going to affect your register and your tone. So it's going to affect, are you speaking formally or informally? And what sort of tone are you using? Are you using a respectful tone? Are you using a critical tone? So understanding who you're writing to, as much as what you're writing about, is paramount. And thirdly, structure. So format, in my head, is different to structure. Format refers to your addresses and such, and structure refers to, do you have a good introduction? Do you have good body paragraphs and a conclusion? And we'll get into some formats which don't require that. But that, in my head, is the sort of typical way that we approach any sort of English piece of writing, is that we have different paragraphs, and each paragraph has a distinctive intention, which joined together ultimately answers the broader question. And then thirdly, some people will love this, some people will hate this, but this is paper 3, language counts. So it's not like just answering questions where you have to get the point across. Your language here is very important, and you're going to get marked down if you do not use appropriate language and grammar and punctuation. So language is not to be underestimated. Avoid spelling and grammar mistakes. Use language and register appropriate to the intention and the classification of the piece. Integrate advanced vocabulary. So make sure that you are proofreading your work. What is nice about paper 3 is it is a long paper, and so if you manage your time correctly, you should have enough time to proofread, meaning you go back to your text that you've written, your piece of writing, and you go through it and you check, have I made any slight concord errors? Have I put a comma when I should have put a full stop? So you have that opportunity to go back with sort of the marker's glasses on and be like, okay, what can I adjust here to ensure my language mark is up where it needs to be? So don't underestimate it. Avoid those silly mistakes. Remember, keep in mind who you're writing to and use appropriate language for that. So don't use slang or informal language. I would avoid using slang at all costs, honestly, because this is still an English paper, but don't use informal language if you are going to be addressing parents at your formal assembly at school. So make sure your language matches that. And make sure that you integrate advanced vocabulary. So don't be afraid, just because this is real life, sort of, I'm putting it in inverted commas, real life ideas or pieces of writing or formats of writing, you still need to integrate advanced vocabulary. This is still ultimately an English piece. So make sure that if you know a fancy word and you know how to use it, include it. Try and make your writing stand out from others. Use the advanced vocabulary. So let's have a look at the rubric. So you can go and you can find this rubric as well on all the past paper memorandums or marking guidelines. And as you can see for paper 3, they don't really have an actual, memo, because everyone writes something different. That's the beauty of English. But you are going to be marked within this framework. So understanding what your mark is looking for is therefore important. So as you can see, content planning and format, which includes response and ideas, organization of ideas for planning, purpose, audience, features, conventions, and context, is for 15 marks. And then your language style and editing, which refers to your tone, register, style, purpose or effect, audience and context, language use and conventions, word choice, punctuation, and spelling, is for 10 marks. There is a slight overlap in this rubric, I must say. However, I want you to think of it in terms of the 3 aspects that we just spoke about. We spoke about content, then we spoke about audience and format, and then we spoke about language. And you can see here that the content and format is in the first 15 marks, and then you have your sort of audience and language in your last 10 marks. So let's have a read of the exceptional, right? Because that's what we're aiming for, the 13 out of 15 out of 15 marks, and the 9 out of, or to 10 out of 10 marks. So for content planning and format, we want to see an outstanding response beyond normal expectations, intelligent and mature ideas, extensive knowledge of features of the type of text. Writing maintains focus, coherence in content and ideas, highly elaborated, and all details support the topic. Appropriate and accurate format. So the big tip that I would have for you with regard to getting these 15 marks for content planning and format is that you have to plan. So you have to take the time to actually analyze your topic, and then to take a highlighter, take a pen, underline the key points, and actually draw up a plan very similar to how you would plan an essay in terms of what your paragraphs are going to be about, what your ultimate intention or argument is, and make sure that your topic or your intention or your purpose comes through these, sub-points that you've generated. So planning is crucial to getting those 15 marks. Secondly, language style and editing, how we're going to get 10 marks. Tone, register, style, and vocabulary highly appropriate to purpose, audience, and context. Grammatically accurate and well constructed, virtually error-free. So if you have a good plan, then you're not going to be worrying about your content because you've put all your bullet points down on your planning page, or whether that planning page is on the question paper or if it's on the answer book. Remember, if you do put it in your folio, to cross it out afterwards once you've actually written the piece. But once you have those bullet points and you have that planning, now all you have to do is take that and write it in beautiful English, right? And write it in nice sentences. And then you can focus intensely on making sure that your language style and editing is perfect. So now there are many different formats, and I would highly recommend that you go through the notes that your teacher has given you or that you've made in class, and that you study all your formats so that you are 100% prepared. Today in this video, I'm just going to talk about a couple of my favorites that if they do come up, I would really recommend that you select one of these options, because I feel like these are the ones that are the easiest format to remember, firstly, but secondly, allow you to really shine as an English student in terms of explaining yourself and coming up with great ideas and being able to substantiate those ideas. So this is my personal opinion. We're going to go through, I've got 3 different slides of the ones that I think you should really pay attention to, but as I said, really go through all the formats for everything so you're prepared. So I've put these 4 on one slide, and the reason why I've done that is because their formats are pretty similar and their intentions are also pretty similar. So let's go through them. A formal letter. A formal letter you are writing to someone who you don't know in a business capacity or something along those lines. So you're going to therefore, address them by their full name, by sir or madam. So with a formal letter, you must obviously remember your addresses. So on the right hand side, you have your address. Then on the left hand side, you have who you're writing to. Remember that a formal letter can include many different types. So a letter to the editor, a letter of complaint. These are all examples of formal letters. Then you would write, dear sir or madam, you'd skip a line and you'd write your heading and you'd underline your heading. You'd skip a line and then you would do your introduction, skip a line, body paragraph 1, skip a line, body paragraph 2, skip a line, conclusion, skip a line, yours faithfully, and you end off with your full name. Remember, if you're writing a matric final, you don't want to use your own name. You should use a generic name so that you allow for, so your marker is not, biased in any way, shape, or form. So make sure that with a formal letter, your intention is very, very clear and that you're obviously writing with a very formal register and very respectful tone. You can obviously be critical if you need to be, but you need to be respectful in what you're saying and you need to justify what you're saying. Formal letters can be really nice topics. Remember, you also have to look for not just the correct format. When you're going through your 6 options and you're choosing your 2, you should obviously look for the format that you prefer, but also look for, do I actually know anything about this topic? So if, for instance, it's about sport and you're an avid sports player and you know lots of things about sport or you watch sport a lot, then go for it. You obviously have ideas. But if you're not really a sports player or a sports watcher, then it would be ill-advised to select that topic because you don't have rich information to draw from to include. An informal letter, very similar to a formal letter, except for the fact that now you actually know the person. And so you are writing typically about something that's less serious or less sort of worldly. So a formal letter could be about the state of education in South Africa, whereas an informal letter would be my experience of matric. Do you see how it's different? Informal letter is more personal, it's more sincere, it's more personal. So over here, you only are going to need one address on the right hand side, and then you would address the person who you're writing to, and sometimes you don't even have to write their surname because you know them. So it might be to a sister or to a teacher that you are writing this informal letter to. And the reason why it's on the same page here is because same thing, you're going to have introduction, 2 body paragraphs, and a conclusion. I would definitely say not to put more than 2 body paragraphs in a transactional writing piece because you just don't have enough words in your word count to allow for this. Your greeting at the end can be a bit more informal and you can sign off sometimes just with your first name as necessary. A magazine article is another wonderful, and I like to call these for the essay-like transactional pieces because they're like mini essays that you're writing in terms of having an introduction, 2 body paragraphs, and a conclusion. So for a magazine article, remember to have a title and a byline, so writing who it's by, skip a line, and then you have this sort of mini essay in inverted commas where you get to explore this topic in a very mature and formal manner. And then lastly, we have a speech. A speech is a really nice option as well because you just have your title once again. You could perhaps put who it's by or the date, and then you have your introduction, 2 body paragraphs, and a conclusion. Sorry, before your introduction, make sure to greet people, and at the end you can say thank you. And a speech is a really nice one, I feel, because it can be formal or it can be informal. So definitely read your question carefully in terms of who your audience is for a speech, so that you make sure that you adjust your language and your style and your tone and your register to fit who the speech is for. With the speech, you also want to try and hook the audience in. So if you can think of a creative way to start your introduction, that is wonderful. So if you remember a quote off the top of your head, or you want to list a bunch of different ideas or adjectives to start off your speech. Now, whatever makes sense to you with that speech topic, I would definitely recommend you try and hook your audience in to make it a little bit more sort of interactive, because a speech you can address you. We haven't actually spoken about pronouns, but just to make it clear, is that transactional writing is all about using those personal pronouns, about using I, you, me, my, showing your opinions, using the second person pronouns to engage and interact with your audience. The second type would be an interview or a dialogue, and this is a really wonderful option as well, because what you do in an interview or a dialogue is you don't have your essay structure like we've just been discussing. However, you still have a beginning, a middle, and an end. So remember, for an interview or dialogue, you have two people talking, you usually have yourself and someone else, and you must make sure that you put a colon after your name to denote that the speaking has now started. If you'd like to show like a stage direction or what the person sort of looks like, or well, not looks like, but what they're doing, perhaps, like shaking their head or talking excitedly, you can put that in brackets to show that it's not actually what's being said. However, don't overuse that. Maybe just once or twice is okay. So for an interview or dialogue, don't waste too much time going, good morning, how are you? Rather, keep that focus to the first two lines, and then you're done with it. And then you get into the beginning, and the beginning is where you actually say, and you can clearly state what the intention of this interview is, or what this dialogue will be discussing. Then you get into your middle, you get into your body, where you actually delve deeper into the ideas, and you show off your knowledge, and you really justify what you're thinking, substantiate, show your insight. And then the last two lines at the end, you wrap it all up and conclude. It's always nice in a conclusion to provide something for the other person to do. This applies to actually any piece of transactional writing. I encourage you to do this and this and this. That's a really nice way to end a conclusion, because then it's like the piece just hasn't just ended suddenly. There's a sort of continuation to it. And then we have the obituary, and the obituary is another good option, I would say, in my opinion. However, it doesn't follow any of the sort of technique or format that we've just previously discussed. So an obituary is what you'd write up about a person to publish in a newspaper after their death. And so often they give you a little bit of the information in the topic, and then you have to embellish that, and you have to then find other details about that person's life to put in the obituary. So the obituary is a different sort of format in the sense that the first paragraph that you have to actually share the details of who died, when they died, how they died, all of those basic details. In the next paragraph, you would focus on who that person was in terms of his career, his family, things like that are important, his profession. And then the next paragraph, you talk about more of the person's legacy, so how they'll be remembered. Like, did they do volunteer work, or what their impact was on society. In the next paragraph, you talk about who they're survived by. So survived by his wife, and you'd put their name. So there is a lot of, things that you need to make up. And finally, in the last paragraph, you would talk about when the funeral or memorial will be taking place. So as you can tell by that description, the paragraph on the career and who the person was, as well as the legacy paragraph, those need to be the longest paragraphs. They need to be the most richly detailed. And you really can show off your English knowledge in those two paragraphs. The other paragraphs are a bit more like sort of factual, but those other the two paragraphs about the career and the legacy, you can really expand on that, and you can really give a nice wholesome perspective of this person using advanced vocabulary. So please remember, there are other formats as well. I just haven't gone through them today. So please make sure that you go through all your other formats. And when you're going through your formats, just keep in mind what's the intention of each piece. So I hope that you've seen, as I've gone through all these different formats, I've tried to pick out what the intention is. Because having intention to your writing is absolutely paramount to your success in transactional writing, because it's going to guide what you're saying. So please, as you go through your formats, just keep in mind, what is the intention of this piece? What am I trying to say? What is the marker looking for? Thank you so much for watching. I really hope that you found this video helpful. Remember to plan and to really go for it in your transactional pieces. Show off your knowledge, show off your English skills. So yeah, please like this video and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed it, and good luck.